Good evening, everybody who's joining us on the webinar this evening. I extend to you a very warm welcome on behalf of the Port Elizabeth office of Retina South Africa. And we have a special guest tonight, Malebo. Welcome, Malebo, to our Port Elizabeth office from a distance. We feel honored to have you as our guest speaker tonight, giving up your valuable time. We do appreciate it very much. Just to introduce Malebo, Malebo completed her master's degree in genetic counselling at the University of Cape Town in 2017. She's currently completing her PhD in genetic counselling at University of Cape Town. Malebo also lectures at the Stellenbosch University and Tygerberg Hospital in the Division of Molecular Biology and Human Genetics. And I was very interested to read, Malebo, that you did your internship in Limpopo at Petersburg Hospital. And it was there that you developed your passion for genetic counselling when you saw how important genetic counselling was to people with inherited retinal diseases or disorders, and that you now have this passion to engage with communities and creating awareness about genetic counselling. And we're very honoured to be part of this community and sharing this information with you tonight, or you sharing your information with us tonight. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really are very excited to have you with us. And of course, I'd like to welcome our Claudette Medifant. I'm sure there isn't a person connected to inherited retinal disorders who doesn't know Claudette. Claudette is our Director of Science. She's also on Retina International. And so welcome, Claudette, and thank you so much for hosting this evening event with us. And to my colleagues in the office, you know, we really are a team with Claudette and the head office, and to Alta and Jonella, who are my colleagues. Welcome tonight, and I'm sure we are going to have an interesting talk tonight. So without further ado, Malebo, can I hand over to you?
Yes, good evening. Thank you for the warm welcome, Gail, and good evening to everyone at home. Thank you for joining us and giving your time to listen to today's talk. It's not going to be a very long talk, and I'd really appreciate if everyone interacts with me. So I'm just going to share my presentation. Is it visible to everyone? Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, just for the time I'm sharing the presentation and presenting, I'll just switch my camera off because sometimes it can have a few glitches if I'm presenting and the video's on. But today we'll just be having a brief talk over genetic testing. Why should you test? What are the advantages? And what other emotions as a person or a parent you could be going through if you're thinking about it for your child. But I thought it would be nice, before we move on and talk about genetic testing, just to give a brief introduction, and to everyone else at home who hasn't had genetic testing before, or who hasn't actually received some of this background on, like, what is the retina, what are genes, and what are chromosomes. So the retina is actually a section at the back of your eye. Just to confirm, Yonela, can you see my mouse on the screen? Okay, thank you. So we know that the retina is at the back of your eye, and it's actually what helps you to see. It converts the light into neural signals, and these signals go to your brain, and then your brain is able to recognize that this is what you're seeing. And you have two very important things at the back of your eye in the retina. And the first one are cones, which are found by the macula, which is here behind, well, you find your cones and rods, and they're here, your cones are here at the back in the macula. And these are very important for higher vision. So when you can see things during the day, that is because your cones are working in bright light. Your color perception, your ability to see detailed work. So if you like knitting and you can see very closely, those are your cones that are helping you to see. And they also give you that sharp central vision, whereas your rods are the ones that help you see in low light. So if you're walking in the dark at night, your rods are actually helping you to see. And they also give you that peripheral vision. So for the people who've driven before, they know that although you're looking straight, you can always see some of the objects on the side or the cars driving by because you've got that peripheral vision. So when we look a little bit closer, when someone starts to have a retinal degenerative condition and the first symptoms are starting to lose that central vision loss. So you're starting to see a little bit blurry when you look straight ahead, but when you're looking on the peripheral side, you can still see a little bit. We always think that there's something wrong with the cones and your condition involves your cones. And if you start to lose your peripheral vision, but you can still see sharp and straight ahead, and you can see some things detail, that's your peripheral vision loss, and that tells us about that this condition could be related to something that's affecting your rods. And these are very important because, as I said, they help you to see, but knowing what the first signs and symptoms are always helpful for the ophthalmologist to be able to determine which condition a person might have. So now we're going back to when we talk about genes, what are we actually talking about? And we all know that a mom and a dad makes a baby and they each give their own genetic information, right? And this genetic information comes in packages of what we call chromosomes, and you each have two of each chromosome in your body. So if you see here on the picture on the left, you'll see that chromosome 1, you have 2 copies, which means you get one from mom and one from dad, and all the way to number 22 here at the bottom. The only difference is that between men and women, a woman will have an X and an X, meaning you get an X from mom and an X from dad. Or if you have an X and a Y, then that is what makes you male and means you got an X from mom and a Y from your father. And then when we take one of these chromosomes, just maybe chromosome number 1, and we unwind it, something like a ball of wool, small little sections of it are called genes. And genes are your actual instructions in the body that tell you how certain things should be built, and including all the functions of everything in your eyes. These are determined by your genes, right? And you can see here, our genes only have 4 letters, but they encode over 20,000 genes. And it's the same as having the alphabet. The alphabet, depending on what order you put it, you can make thousands and thousands and thousands of words, depending on how you write it together. And that's the same thing with happening with your genes, that depending on the sequence of these letters, certain genes will be encoded for, and they'll make a protein or what actually does the work in your body. So now we're coming to look at the different patterns of inheritance. And I thought I should include this because when I do provide genetic counseling and give result feedback so far that I've done for Retina SA, I've had to explain patterns of inheritance, and they're quite important for you to understand. Also, when I'm going to talk about the different types of testing you can have. So our first one is autosomal dominant, and which means that usually we find that one of the parents have the condition, and they can either, because remember we have 2 copies of every gene, right? Or the one from mom and the one from dad that's found on those chromosomes. So let's say the gene we are looking for is on chromosome 1, and the chromosome 1 that you got from your father is actually the one that had the mutation, and that's the one he gave you, and hence you end up having the same condition as him. And going forward, when you have children, remember you have 2 copies. You can either give them the one that doesn't work or the one that works. And sometimes with these autosomal dominant conditions, so they affect every other gene in your chromosomes except the X and the Y, we know that sometimes it happens for the first time in that child. So you'll find that there's a certain condition that your child has, but it didn't come from any of the parents, and that is quite common with autosomal dominant conditions. And there's sometimes no family history. And both parents can be affected with the condition, and they can both pass it on to their children. Our next one is autosomal recessive. And I think with this one, if you've received results before or just read up on the internet, you'd hear us talking about something like a carrier. And what this is about is we're going back to those 2 copies of genes that you get from your parents, right? And maybe we're back at chromosome number 1, the gene is somewhere here on chromosome number 1. You'll find that each of your parents on one of their genes, they carry this genetic change on these genes. And they don't have the condition because they have the backup copy. And if they have the backup copy to do the work, then they are fine. But then what happens is, while having kids, they can either give both the working copy. So if both mom and dad give you a working copy, then the child will be healthy and we don't need to worry about anything. The father can give the one that's not working, mom can give one that's working, then the child will be a carrier like mom and dad. And the other option is either you get both copies that do not work from mom and dad, and that's how you present with the condition. And for these autosomal recessive conditions, what we do know is if you have one and we say it's passed in or inherited in an autosomal recessive way, all your children will be carriers of this condition. So they will be like your mom and dad, where they don't have the condition necessarily, but they can pass it on to their future generations. Another common one we see with inherited retinal disorders is our X-linked recessive ones. And this gets a little bit complicated because we're only looking at your sex chromosomes. So these are your genes found either on your X chromosomes. So if you are a male, and you inherit one gene that's not working. So looking at the picture here on the right, if you are that male and on your X chromosome, maybe from your mom, you inherited a gene that's not working, or it happened in you for the first time, then we're not worried about any of your sons, because you will always give your son a Y chromosome and mom gives the son an X chromosome. But when you have daughters, because you only have one X, they will all inherit that same X chromosome that you have. Most of the time, women with an X-linked recessive condition don't have any symptoms because they always have that backup copy X chromosome. And that's how I was explaining in the beginning, that women have an XX and men have an XY. And that's how when you are a male who's affected with an X-linked condition, you'll never hear us asking, oh, but what about your sons? We will ask about your daughters. And they too then need to be concerned about when they have children in future. And the reason they need to be worried, coming to the picture here on my left, is because she would be a carrier, right? Having inherited the one that's not working from her father, and she has another one that's working. So she can only give her kids one or the other. And she can either not give her sons anything or give her daughter anything, so have both working copies, or she can give her daughter a copy that isn't working. And now this daughter becomes a carrier like her and will be worried about her future generation, her sons and daughters. But she can also give this X to her son, the one that's not working, and he will definitely be affected with the condition because he doesn't have a backup copy. So when we talk about carrier testing later in the presentation, just keep in mind the X-linked recessive and the autosomal recessive conditions, and also keep in mind the autosomal dominant for when we talk about predictive testing. So retinal conditions are quite complicated on a genetic level, and this is just to show you how a lot of the conditions overlap with some signs and symptoms. So when an ophthalmologist does the testing, they can look quite similar to each other, but also on a genetic level, it gets quite complicated because you can see that this circle here, and this is for retinitis pigmentosa, it has some genes that belong to other conditions, such as Leber's congenital amaurosis, where the genes can be either you can have a mutation in that gene, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have retinitis pigmentosa or Leber's congenital amaurosis. We also have to look at the clinical picture to say, okay, you definitely have retinitis pigmentosa or you have Leber's congenital amaurosis. And that's why it's important for you to have both the clinical and the genetic for us to give you a clear diagnosis. So you can see that even for other conditions, the genes overlap that cause the same conditions. A common one is ABCA4, and you can see it's responsible for four different types of disease groups. So when you're considering the process of genetic testing, something that everyone needs to think about is that with genetics, since they run through the family, most of the time, the whole family is our client in a way. And sometimes we may require to test your affected parent or family member before you, because having a result will automatically reveal the result. So if you come to me and say to us, no, my mother has retinitis pigmentosa, I would like to test and see what's happening with me, we'd first ask to test your mother before we can test you, because if we test you and we get a result, it means automatically we've tested your mom without her permission. So we'd also need to see your mom and have her attend that genetic counseling session and discuss with her whether or not she would like to have testing, and then move in sort of an orderly fashion. And sometimes we may need parental samples to confirm certain findings, especially with autosomal recessive conditions. So even if I test, or we test a certain person, maybe a daughter or a son with one condition, and we find that we found a result and it's autosomal recessive, and we found 2 mutations, we usually just need to go back and test both parents just to make sure that these 2 genetic changes do come from both parents. Because sometimes you can inherit one from one parent, but then the second mutation or change happens by itself when you were still forming in your mother's womb. The process of genetic testing is to register with Retina SA, and because you're on the mailing list, I'm assuming all of you are. And it's basically if you want to, but we highly suggest it because they help to facilitate a lot of the testing. They help as many patients as they can, and they also help people from disadvantaged backgrounds who wouldn't otherwise afford genetic testing because it's quite expensive. And then you also need a clinical diagnosis, and this is done by an ophthalmologist. They really need to look into your eye and see that what is exactly wrong with the eye. And also some of the conditions, they can actually give us a diagnosis, and we would just confirm it by doing genetic testing. And then after that, the best route to go is to have genetic counselor, to see a genetic counselor for pre-test counseling. And then we move on. After pre-test counseling, we can have your sample collected for the genetic test. Usually the turnaround time for genetic testing, depending on the company that you would be using for testing, can be anything from 2 weeks to 3 months. And the sample that we're usually using at the moment is saliva, because saliva transports well, and we're able to mail saliva much easier than blood, because blood causes a lot of issues, especially when you want to send the sample overseas. And other things you need to think about is there can be DNA extraction costs and courier costs that you might have to pay unless you have funding via Retina SA or another sponsor or donor. And then following that, you need to have post-test counseling, or your results receiving genetic counseling. And this is very important because we're going to give you back your results and help you to adapt to this new reality you're faced with. So with pre-test counseling, what we usually do is discuss the condition in detail that we suspect that you have, or what the ophthalmologist has given you. We discuss the genetic aspects. So what is the potential inheritance patterns? What are we testing for? The number of genes that we're testing for, because you saw in the diagram earlier on, for some condition, actually for all of those conditions, multiple genes can cause that condition. So we tell you how many of those genes we would be testing for. And another important thing, which is very key, is preparing you for various results. They can be variants of uncertain significance, negative or positive results, which I'll discuss in a moment. And then there's the emotional aspect, managing your expectations, telling you that there is a chance of you not getting a result at all. And this is important because people generally think if we're doing any kind of test, we must get a result. And sometimes we don't find any changes. And that doesn't change the fact that you already have the condition. It just means that we need to go back. And if you want to go into a research project, and UCT are the ones who are currently doing it, where they can keep checking and looking for genes that are possibly causing your condition. And then we have to deal with other emotions, because for the people who've been through this process, I know that in the waiting period, you could be having some anxiety, feeling uncertain, and other feelings that are not listed here. Once we have the result, and then we have the post-test counseling session or your results feedback session, then I'll provide with you the results. And the most important thing that we do is interpret the result for you, because usually they use very technical terms on your results sheets. And for those who've received their results before, they can see that some of the stuff, they're not understandable to anyone who actually doesn't do science and works in the lab. So we help to interpret that result, explain what the result really means in detail. So when you're saying you have a variant of uncertain significance, what does that mean for you? What does it mean for your family? And then if we do have a result, we'll go over the inheritance pattern again and identify other at-risk family members who could benefit from genetic counseling and testing if they want to. Another important thing of the post-test counseling is to help you adapt to the results. Whether it's a positive, negative, or VUS, we help you to go through the emotions. So we talk about how you feel about the result, dealing with the disappointment of the result, because people can be disappointed regardless of, do I have to do the poll that just popped up? Okay, I just minimized this, sorry. So it's about adapting to the results and how do you feel about the result, dealing with the disappointment. So even some people are disappointed if we do find a genetic cause for them, because it makes it very real for them. Others are disappointed when you don't find a result. And I know with variants of uncertain significance, which I'm going to discuss in more details, those are very uncertain, even for us as genetic counselors. So those can cause some discomfort in our clients. And also dealing with other emotions such as survivor's guilt or family members testing negative. So you might feel guilty because you, of all your other 4 siblings, are the only one who doesn't have the condition, who isn't a carrier, and you are perfectly healthy. And that is a real thing, and it's normal to feel that way. So we talk about those kinds of feelings, and especially because sometimes you can't share with anyone, because everyone expects you to be happy that you're the one that doesn't have the condition, but actually deep inside you're feeling quite guilty that why do you have to be the one without the condition, whereas you feel that maybe another sibling could have benefited from not having the condition. And then we try to connect you and refer you to other services such as other support groups. I do know that people make smaller support groups that are specific for certain conditions, referring you to a social worker. And the lovely thing about Retina SA is they already have social workers. So if there's issues, we usually just tell them, like I've spoken to Yonella before and told her that there was an issue with the school, and then she tries to assist the clients as necessary. Okay. And next we have our different types of testing. So we have diagnostic testing, and this is to confirm a clinically suspected diagnosis. And this is for most of the people who are part of Retina SA that either come for themselves or their children who have a diagnosis from an ophthalmologist, and they say, I want to do genetic testing because I want to confirm, I want to find whatever has caused this condition. So this person already has the symptoms. Then we have carrier screening or testing. So this is a at-risk healthy individual to see if they are carriers of this disease-causing variant in recessive conditions. And this is mainly for your autosomal recessive and your X-linked recessive condition. And remember, we said for X-linked recessive condition, females are carriers, and for autosomal recessive conditions, the parents and the siblings and everyone else can also be carriers. So we would do this carrier screening so you know whether or not you're a carrier, and we can offer it to you and your partner if you're concerned about having a child with the same condition maybe one of your siblings has. And then we've got predictive testing, and this is usually testing on an individual who are at risk for inheriting a known family mutation. And usually we do this with our adult onset conditions. So we do know that there's a big variety of conditions within the inherited retinal diseases, right? And with that big spectrum, the conditions that start in childhood, others maybe may present in adolescent stages, and others actually present in adulthood. So if there is a family mutation and you're concerned about that family mutation, that that, no, I have a sibling or a parent who has this condition, I don't have symptoms yet, it's an adult onset condition, I would like to test to know whether or not I'm going to develop it. So in this case, it's usually our sort of autosomal dominant conditions. And when we're testing you, you go through a different process, which we call predictive testing, because obviously when that mutation comes back and says, yes, you're positive, you're definitely going to develop the condition, but we're just not sure exactly when. So there's also that option that if in your family you have a condition that usually starts in adulthood, you can go through predictive testing, and we can do this for you to know beforehand, are you going to develop the condition? And if you are, what can you put in place? Other people want to sort out their careers, other people want to sort out other things, to make sure that should they start having symptoms at some point, then they've sort of laid and planned out the rest of their life and how it can be. Obviously, you can't plan for everything. And that's the thing with predictive testing is once you present with symptoms, I think no amount of preparation can prepare you for vision loss, especially when you were born and you could see your whole entire life. And that's where we come and try to connect with support groups or connect with other people who also have a similar condition, who tell you how they've dealt with it and how it's been for them, because it is still equally as hard to lose your vision in adulthood as it is all the way from if you started in childhood. And then we have another one called prenatal testing. And I haven't seen anyone for prenatal testing yet for inherited retinal diseases. But what happens is if we have a mutation and we know that there's a chance of the child or the fetus inheriting it, some couples, when they're pregnant, they may opt to have this testing because they feel that maybe one of them is already affected with the condition. They feel that they would not or could not have a child who's affected like them because maybe life has been hard or things like that. So they would opt to have the testing to find out whether or not the child carries the same conditions or if the child has the same condition as them. And some parents want to know because they want to prepare themselves if the child is going to be either like one of them or going to have this condition. And others want to consider other things such as termination of pregnancy, but also these things would deal with it on a case-by-case basis, because we do know when it comes to termination of pregnancy, we're governed by the law and what we can and what we can't terminate for, and how late or how early you are in the pregnancy. But with regards to prenatal testing, there's other technologies that are out there, especially in private. They're doing pre-implantation genetic testing. So it's the same process as you do for IVF, but before they implant back the embryo, they would test it if it has that condition. And the ones that have the same condition or a retinal inherited disorder, they don't implant back the embryos, and only the embryos that are considered to be healthy would be implanted. So there's various options within the prenatal setting on how you can go about with it. So now we're just looking at when you actually do test, what are we testing for, or what tests are we doing? Firstly, we have our single gene and or single mutation testing. So usually this is for specific on mutations that we know, or we know that this condition definitely looks like this and it might be in this single gene. But you know, inherited retinal conditions are complex. So usually we test for more than one gene, unless we already know that in this family, this is the mutation that's running in the family. And when you come for genetic testing, we will only test you for the mutation that runs in your family. And then we have something that's called founders testing. An example of it is Quick7 for Stargardt's. And this is a common condition where we know in our white, in our Afrikaner South African population, there's a high carrier frequency, which means there's quite a few people who are carriers of this condition. And we can test for it. We have a quick test 7, which means we're only testing for 7 mutations for this condition specifically. But we wouldn't offer this quick 7 test in a Black South African who are suspecting Stargardt's in, because that's not a mutation that's common in their population. But for Bardet-Biedl syndrome, which is also another retinal inherited disorder, but it's more syndromic, meaning it affects other organs of the body too, then we have founder mutations, so meaning we have mutations that we know that are common in Black people within our South African population and would specifically first test that. The advantage of having mutations that we know are more common in what population in our country is that we're able to test them, but it also tends to be a little bit cheaper than testing multiple genes or doing a panel testing, which is what we're doing for most people at the moment. So when we're moving to our panel testing, this is many genes that are tested all at the same time. And depending where you are doing your testing, UCT, I think they're doing about 112 genes that are being tested at the same time. And the problem with this, or the only limitation we have with this, is that the more genes we test, the more variants of uncertain significance that we have, which means we have more results that we don't know what they mean because they haven't quite been researched yet. So certain mutations haven't been researched very well. So we can't say whether it causes the condition or it doesn't cause the condition. But also panel testing helps because inherited retinal conditions are complex, and as you saw in the diagram below, they overlap even with the type of genes, or the same gene may lead to many different conditions and with many different mutations. So this is a very helpful way of testing, but we always have to be aware of the variants of uncertain significance, which we would discuss in your pre-test counseling so that you're prepared for that kind of result. So coming to our results, and I'll just start with variants of uncertain significance. And what this means is that we looked at the genes and we found a change, but we actually don't know what that change means. So genetic changes, also called variants, are classified differently. There are ones that are called disease-causing or pathogenic, the ones that are called benign, so meaning they don't cause the condition. And there in the middle sits our VUSs, so our uncertain significance. And that means that we can see the change. We're not sure what it means. It's definitely not disease cause. It's not disease causing, so it's not benign because we haven't been able to classify it as benign, and we also haven't been able to classify it as that it definitely causes disease. And what usually happens with these variants is that as time goes and more research is made available and more people start to have the same change with the same condition, then it can be reclassified to disease causing. And when we come back to this, it's when we sometimes get these kinds of results, especially when you test via UCT, what they do is that on an annual basis, so every year with the patients that they have tested, they will go through and check that the one who got a VUS, is it's now reclassified into disease causing or not disease causing, just so that we can give an updated result. And if there's still nothing and it's still there, then we don't give an updated result because there is no update. The next thing is having a negative result. That means they tested these genes and they found nothing. They didn't get a result that any of them or any of the common changes that we know are disease causing. So this does not mean that you don't have the condition, and it definitely does not mean that your condition is not genetic. What it actually means is that your condition is genetic, but we still need to do more research to find for you specifically, or you and your family, what caused the condition. And on a day-to-day basis, we're having more and more genes being added. For example, there's a new panel with Invitae. Now they have 293 genes that they test for. But obviously, the bigger the panel, so the panel just means we're testing multiple genes, and the more genes we test, the higher chances of getting the VUSs there. So I know negative results can be quite disappointing because as a client, you sit there in front of us and say, but then what does it mean now? Like, it means that I don't have a result, and it can be quite disappointing. It can be quite upsetting to get a negative result when you are hoping to get a result. But it's important for you to remember that having no genetic result doesn't mean it's not genetic. It's highly likely it's genetic, but more research still needs to be done to see what other genes or other changes are actually causing the condition. Then the next one we have is positive results. And positive results are results that we get and they tell us that this is the change that we found that's causing the disease in this person. And these are quite straightforward. We've given positive results to different people. And the advantage of having positive results is that now when they're talking about clinical trials and all of that, we can, I think you stay on the Retina SA database, and once there's a clinical trial for you, they will check if you qualify qualify for it, and I think they contact you. But another important thing is that when you do have these results, then we have a clearer indication of what is happening. We can test other family members, which is quite important, because a negative result and an unvariant of uncertain significance, usually we can't test other family members because it might still remain uninformative, right? But unless we have more and more family members with the same condition, then we test them and we find that they all actually have this VUS, it might be considered for reclassification. But with positive results, we're quite certain we can test the family members for that specific mutation, depending on how the condition is inherited, whether it's autosomal dominant. Then if it's autosomal dominant and it's sort of an adult onset or later onset, we can do the predictive testing. If it's carrier, if it's a recessive condition, so X-linked or autosomal recessive, we can do carrier testing for everyone at risk. So everyone who we think might have inherited that change, we can do carrier screening on them to allow them to have choices that they can make, or informed choices regarding future reproductive health. But also you as the client have now choices that, okay, what do I want to do going forward? When I have children, do I want to have children? Don't I want to have children? Do I want to do prenatal testing? Don't I want to do prenatal testing? So you're able to make that decision for yourself while having these results that you're working with. And so I've been speaking, and to summarize why you should test, it helps to confirm diagnosis in some cases, but usually the ophthalmologist diagnoses are quite accurate so far, the ones that I have seen. And it helps us to determine carrier status, test at-risk family members. It can give us the prognosis. So some of the conditions, once we have a mutation, we're able to determine the common thing that happens going forward with your condition. Does it get more severe? Does it stabilize at a certain point, or does it get, okay, they don't really get better, so they either stabilize or get worse. And other people can end up being legally blind. So, but some of this can also be provided by just the ophthalmologist giving you regular checking and screening. And remember that having a genetic test does not remove the need for you to have your normal checkups that your ophthalmologist wants to have with you, because remember, the ophthalmologist needs to check how your condition is progressing, which we can't tell you from a genetic test result, or how fast it's progressing or how slow it's progressing. And then another important thing is the clinical trial. So we don't have any treatment, if I put it that way, that 100% cures the condition or makes it slow down. But we have these clinical trials where they try in different ways of slowing down disease progression. Some, they may be trying to improve vision, but important thing is slowing down or stopping disease progression. And there's many clinical trials that run at different times, and I've provided that link for clinicaltrials.gov, and it just helps you to see what clinical trials are out there, which ones are being made available in South Africa, because just because it's running in America or in the UK doesn't always result in the clinical trial being run in South Africa. So you can see what's being run where, and also Retina SA does keep track of clinical trials that are currently available. But if you have a genetic test result, there's usually a criteria that you need to meet to qualify for a clinical trial. And this includes your age, what condition you have, how progressed is the condition, and also what mutation do you have, especially for some of the gene-based therapy. So this is quite helpful to have a genetic test result for hopes of having a clinical trial that could improve your vision. But the other thing is that while we're talking about clinical trials, is that sometimes it might not work. And that's why it's important to have genetic counseling, because we can manage those emotions and prepare you while we're giving you results. That clinical trials don't always give a miracle. And sometimes you may have genetic testing, you might have not qualified for a clinical trial, or there might not be a clinical trial for you in the time that you're alive. But who knows, in the next 30 years, there will be a clinical trial that maybe your kids or your other family members could benefit from. So that's also to know that not everyone ends up being enrolled in a clinical trial, but they are already trying, and technology is advancing and we're discovering more and more things. I mean, just look at how fast they found a COVID vaccine. They found COVID vaccines that are actually done with new technology, which is the mRNA stuff. So it actually shows that there's hope in technology and that we're moving forward. And yeah, and I think Retina SA is really the biggest mandate is to help people have access to testing, but also try to find a cure for these conditions. And hence they they try their best to keep track of what's happening and what treatment is out there. But we can't talk about genetic testing without talking about limitations of testing, because you also need to understand that when you're testing, what are other things that are not so positive about testing? And the first one is genetic testing tends to provide limited information about an inherited condition. So what that means is that we can't, just because you have a genetic test result, as I say, it doesn't remove the job or the need of you following up with your ophthalmologist, because we can't necessarily determine how your symptoms will present. We can't determine how severe you'll be, and we cannot determine how and whether the disease will progress over time. We can just tell you about the general picture of what we've seen in the general population of people who've had that same condition, that what we usually see with this certain condition, around about this age, people do become blind. But remember, each person is different and they experience certain conditions a little bit different. And you may be faster progression or a little bit slower progression. So a genetic test result can't really tell your future, but we can tell you from what we've seen in other people, what can be expected. There's also a lack of treatment strategies, which I've already explained with the clinical trials. And an important thing you should know is that when we're doing genetic testing for inherited retinal conditions, we're not testing for anything else. We are doing specific testing specific to these conditions. So we're not going to determine your whole entire genetic makeup. We won't necessarily go and look for a different condition in you. We're just literally going for that specific condition. And we try very hard. All the labs try very hard to be very accurate with everything that they do. They have quality assurance in all the labs that do testing, but there can always be human error. And even under the best conditions, there can be incorrect results. But so far that I know of, I haven't given incorrect results where we find that maybe something wrong happened in the lab and I've delivered, then I have to come back and give again. But obviously that's always a small chance that it's possible, but they really try their best not to make any mistakes. And if you enroll in research, it's important to know that there might not be any benefit for you specifically. So you might never get any results. No one might ever give you any feedback of any form, although most genetic related research now, they're trying to do result feedback, especially when we find useful information, like we find that there is a disease-causing mutation. But with that being said, I mean, UCT, what they do is for people who have negative results on any of the panels that are tested through them, we come back and say to you, now that we have a negative result, would you like to enroll in the research? And the advantage of the research is that now they can use your sample to explore more genes, and they might or might not find a disease-causing variant in you. And the implications of testing are quite important, because we can say, cool, go test, but then what implications can it have on you? And this is now the social and the personal implications. The most important thing is it gives you autonomy, or allows you to make well-informed decisions going forward when we find a result. So for example, with the ABCA4 gene, it's a gene with about 900 mutations and causes many conditions, as you saw in the previous diagram. But I'm using that as an example to explain. So we know that there are some common mutations in there, and it's what I was talking about with Stargardt's, that we have a quick 7 test that tests the most common mutations in South Africa. So if you are a little bit concerned because our carrier frequency, so something about 1 in 51 or 1 in 57, somewhere around there, Caucasian people or population in South Africa are a carrier of one of these mutations, and we have the 7 top mutations that we can test for. So if you're Caucasian, Afrikaner, and your partner is also the same, and you're concerned about having a child with this condition, you can arrange for genetic counseling, and you have genetic counseling, and then after that you can decide whether or not you want to do carrier testing. And what carrier testing does is that you can test before marriage, you can test before having children, and decide that, okay, what are we going to do going forward? Are we going to test while we're pregnant to know whether or not our child has this condition, so that we know, we prepare ourselves when we deliver? Do we want to do that pre-implantation genetic diagnosis? Would we consider something like termination of pregnancy for inherited retinal conditions? So it allows you to make well-informed decision in a stance that you say, I know what I have or I don't have, and what am I going to do going forward? But an important thing for people to remember is that genetic counseling is essential, even with or without the testing, just for you to be able to be informed. So if you're now still thinking about testing, but you're not quite sure if you want to have testing, it can be arranged via Retina. Say you can see one of us, the genetic counselors. We can talk to you about this condition that you're concerned about, and only later you can decide whether or not you want to have genetic testing, because just having the information, having gone through the genetic counseling process, you're able to just determine what is best for you. And that's why we always want our clients to make well-informed decision, and also to self-govern, make your own decisions based on what you think is best for you and your belief system. And some of the implications include emotions you may feel. Whether these emotions you feel them while waiting for your results or after you have results, you can experience anger, anxiety, depression, guilt for having a negative result. And some parents who are carriers of autosomal recessive conditions and their child gets diagnosed with that condition, they may also experience guilt for having carried this mutation. Now their child has this condition and can believe that it's their fault. But it's quite important for you to remember that no one chooses what genes to give to our kids. And we would all love to choose to give our kids or give all your children all working genes, but these things just happen on their own, and most of the time you did not know. So those are common emotions. And other emotions people can feel on the other side, they may feel joyful that, okay, now we have found a disease-causing gene. You can feel relief if you come back with a negative result, even a positive result, that, okay, now we can move forward. You can be at peace, there can be acceptance. But remember, I said that even when we find a cause, you may be angry, because now you can question yourself and be like, why did this happen to me? Why do I have to have the mutation? And going through your own grief process, because now having that mutation makes the diagnosis a little bit more real. And even not having a mutation or not having the condition, as I explained with like if your siblings have it and you don't, you can still experience anger. You can experience anxiety, feeling as if, why am I the one who is okay and they're not okay? What can I do going forward? What if they blame me? What if they don't like me? You know, all these emotions. People go through different emotional processes who go through genetic testing process. And it's important to know that no matter what you're feeling, it is okay and it is normal to feel that way, because it's your own journey. And other implications is that there can be some tension within families. As I explained earlier on, it can reveal information about other family members. So maybe I test only to find I have the disease-causing mutation. My mom already has symptoms about that condition. It will reveal that she has the condition too. But in genetic counseling, we try to facilitate. We try to get even the people who don't want to test involved and part of the conversation, so they can know, what they need to know, and maybe give permission to test the other family members, even if they know that it may reveal a result about them. There may be disagreements about testing. I mean, for example, what if we have identical twins who are at risk of having a certain condition? They're not symptomatic yet, or whatever the situation is. One wants to test, the other one doesn't want to test. But because they are identical twins, the moment we test the other one and the result comes back and says she's a carrier, automatically the other twin is a carrier, because they are genetically identical, right? And other disagreements can be even between sisters, where one decides, and we've seen this a lot even with breast cancer gene testing, so the BRCA1 and BRCA2, where siblings are saying, no, no one must test in the family. We must just let bygones be bygones. Our parents have died. We'll just see how it goes. But other siblings want to test, and they end up not talking to each other, no longer communicating with each other, because now this genetic testing is something that other people don't want to be involved with. And then there can be guilt, which I have already explained. And then you can feel some isolation, especially if you're the only one who's affected in the family. You may feel quite sad, you may feel alone, you may feel like other people don't understand, especially when your family doesn't make, or the people you live with, active decisions to try and accommodate your vision loss. They know that they shouldn't leave things run all around the house, so that you can move about easily without tripping, without stepping on things that might hurt you. So when things like that are not happening, you may feel quite isolated in your family. And if you're the only one with the condition, you may also feel as if maybe there's something wrong with you and things like that. So those are emotions that people may go through. But other people come from more supportive families. People will try to adapt how the family is, the household is, just to accommodate you as your vision loss progresses going forward. And other stuff with regards to genetic testing, there could be some discrimination with employment, with life insurance, and these get complicated. And if you, like, especially for our adult onset conditions, things do get a little bit complicated. But I know that the South African law tries to protect people as far as possible. But we know that for medical aid and all of those things, you do need to disclose. If you know, you do need to disclose your results. Obviously, if you don't know your results, but you have a diagnosis, those you do need to disclose. Should anything happen, you don't want to get into trouble legally, but there could be some discrimination. Even with employment, there could be discrimination. But I mean, with labor law, they really try to include people of different abilities to be included in the company. So if you've got low vision, companies should still have people who have disability within those companies. I know I had a client where his vision was getting progressively worse, so then they had to move him to a different department. So companies will try their best, and I'm not sure about the legalities of that, but generally with human rights, you shouldn't be discriminated against, but discrimination happens. And some companies can adapt to having someone with low vision as vision progresses, becomes progressively worse. But sometimes there is no job that you can do. But if it's on the computer, there's low vision aids and things like that. And that's why it helps to be part of support groups, because you can learn about more and actually help your employer to help you with your day-to-day job. And some people, though, low vision aids might not help them at all, depending on the condition you have. And another important thing is financial strain, because genetic testing to begin with is quite expensive, and other people lose their jobs due to disease progression. I mean, if you were a welder, or if you were doing something very physical that needed your eyes to see, you could lose your job and causes financial strain on you and the family. And that's just not from genetic testing alone, it's just from having a condition which leads to low vision. And obviously there's usually stigma, so people will stigmatize. I think people later will be able to share their experiences with stigma. And these are just the list of labs, but we know the one that's sort of competing in the market is Invitae. And I took these actually mainly from the list that Retina SA provides. I know that they're trying to involve Invitae, especially for clients who are paying for themselves. Invitae is $250. In rands, it depends on the currency for that day. The advantage of testing with Invitae, which we tend to use with our patients, even in state hospital, is that usually when the results come back, we have 3 months to test as many relatives as we can who are at risk for free. So they'll do that testing for free. Then we have testing from molecular vision. We have the NHLS Quick 7 for Stargardt's disease. So when we know what condition you have and you belong to a particular population, there's usually no need to do big panels of testing multiple genes. We just test for the common mutation. And then we have next generation sequencing. Also, these are panels at UCT. ASPA tends to be more expensive, and UCT does work with the Manchester Center for Genomic Medicine. But these are different labs that do the testing, and it will be more in detail in the handout that are given by retina essay. And so you would go through this with a genetic counselor once that's organized via retina essay in what you can afford if you don't qualify for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. But I can be corrected on that. And then so I have a few questions, and if there are any questions, Janella, please share with me. But if there's no other questions, and I have questions for the audience, everyone at home, if you've tested, how has testing impacted your life? If you haven't tested, why haven't you tested? If you would like to share and you feel open to sharing with us, have you considered carrier screening if it's an autosomal recessive condition in your family? And how do you feel about negative results if you are a person who's received negative results? Thank you. Or let me switch my camera back on. There we go.
Thank you so much, Malebo, for that informative presentation. Before we go on, can I just ask everybody, if you've got any questions, use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, or you can use the chat button. You can use either of that, or you can just raise your hand. Then we'll have to give you a chance to speak. If you've got any comments, any questions on the presentation, you can do one of the three things. And after we're done, we also have a poll there. Please help us to improve our services. We like to bring you the information that you need. If there's anything that you would like us to improve on from now on, or any other information that was not shared in this session that you'd like us to bring it to you sometime, whether it's via email, please do use the poll to rate us, and also do email us at pe.office@retinasa.org.za, or you can give us a call during working hours at 041 363 0164. So now we'll take questions. So anybody that has a question, we've got a question from Manny Modri. Okay, Chad. He's thanking Manny. He said, "Thank you for the great presentation, Malebo." Thanks, Manny.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. If anyone has got any questions, you can use those. And those who have my WhatsApp number, if you can't use any, or we can't find any of those buttons, please do send it through to me on my WhatsApp. I'll read it out, and then you can get the answer questions. And I'm remind you again, the email to use after this session is pe.office@retinasa.org.za.
And
I have a comment for Malebo.
Yes.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. It was a great overview, and thank you for all the compliments you paid to Retina South Africa. Just to say that there actually is one treatment for a retinal condition, but it's so expensive that we don't really talk about it. But there is a genetic replacement therapy for a rare form of LCA, which is the RPE65. It costs many, many, many millions of rand, but it is available. So if anybody has got very bad vision, but lots of money, they can always contact us, and we will get them in touch with the Luxturna laboratory overseas. And also, we're very proud to say that we are engaged with our first clinical trial, which is for Stellenbosch, and we are now in the pre-recruitment stage of recruiting for our second ABCA4 trial. So it's just another incentive to add to your list of why people really should have a genetic test. And thank you very much for your really informative presentation.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. I wasn't actually aware the treatment was available for the LCA. I thought they were still doing clinical trials, but it's great news. And the thing that everyone needs to know is genetic conditions, because they tend to be individually rare. So you may have one type of condition, and the number of people who have the condition in the world are not as many. The treatment tends to also be quite expensive. It's different from maybe medication for like flu. Everyone gets flu. companies are sure that they're definitely going to make a profit. We're all going to buy cough syrup at the end of the day. But the difference with genetic conditions is that they tend to sort of be quite rare on an individual level, and that's why treatment tends to be so expensive. But that's why we advocate for people to do genetic testing, to get in touch with organizations such as Retina SA, because the more people we have who have that same condition, the higher the need, and hopefully treatment prices will start to reduce.
Agreed. And also, of course, for clinical trials, you know, if you've got a very rare condition, we try to encourage people to get their other family members who are affected onto it, because if you've got a rare condition, 4 or 5 patients can be a cohort for a phase 1 clinical trial or phase 2. And when trials usually go into phase 2 or phase 3, they usually go to multi-center trials. And we bring, and that's how we managed to get the Acusella trial to South Africa, because we had this excellent cohort that we've developed with UCT over the years, Stargard's with ABCA4 mutations. And the good news is, out of the 30 laboratories internationally, facilities, 30 throughout the world, and in South Africa, we actually enrolled the most patients. We actually enrolled 30 patients onto the clinical trial, and it's now in its 2nd year.
Sure, that's great news. And giving permission to Retina SA to have your results is a very personal choice, and you do it if you're comfortable. But we do encourage it, because when trials like this come along, they're able to check their database of who do we have with this condition and could benefit from this particular clinical trial, and then they will contact you all. So it's nice to be part of an organization where there's everyone within it and everyone who's enlisted with them, because at the end of the day, it helps them with tracking you guys. So please also give correct phone numbers, because those are very important. I think I've had one incident where we couldn't get hold of someone. And if you are updating your phone number, so you've changed your phone number, contact whichever social worker like Yonela or whoever in your area, and just say, please, I've changed my phone number. Let them know this is my new number or this is my new email address, so that in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, when we do find something that is specifically for your condition, you can be contacted about.
And we actually have found this as well, that during lockdown, and Yonela was also involved, because we weren't able to do house visits or hospital visits, we actually phoned every single patient on our patient registry. And there were dozens and dozens of people who had changed their phone numbers, didn't respond to email addresses. So it means that if a clinical trial for their particular condition pops up, we're not going to be able to contact them. And we really want to assure people that UCT or genetic counselors don't give us your genetic result without your permission. So we have a release form that you sign and give to your genetic counselor. And so many people feel if they're registered with UCT or with a genetic counselor, they're automatically registered with Retina South Africa. And of course, that's not the case. We have to have permission to register you, and also your permission to get your genetic diagnosis from your counselor. So well done, and thank you for that really good talk.
Thank you so much,
Claudette.
Thank you so much, Claudette. Let me just remind everybody, we do have the buttons at the bottom. If you have any questions or any comments that you want us to read, this session has been recorded, and it will be available on our social media platform, and the link for YouTube will be shared on your emails or on your WhatsApp. And for those who don't understand English, I'm so sorry, but ukhona kwaba bangayiunderstand your English ne, apha ezantsi sinamaqhosha onokwazi uwacofa. Uba unombuzo okanye une-comment okanye ikhona into ofuna uyithetha malunga nokuthestwa komnombo yokuba ivela phi le condition onayo yamehlo ne, please ne ungasebenzisa eza button ithi ibhalwe Q&A okanye le ithe chat ne usibhalele phayana, if awukwazi i-message after sigqibile sizamela back kuwe ndiyayazi inamba yam abanayo inamba yam if awunayo inamba yam inamba yethu yaseofisini ngu-041 363 0164 i-email address pe.office@retinasa.org.za. so singakwazi ukuphendula imibuzo yenu naxa seyiphelelile session okanye ningaphinda niyibukele kwakhona ku-Facebook wethu Retina South Africa Cure Insight okanye ku-YouTube wethu sizazithumela zonke i-link xa sesigqibile.
Yonela, we have a question.
So we have a question from Karsten. She said, very informative talk. Thank you, Malebo. Which inherited retinal conditions are most seen in South Africa?
Thank you for the question, Karsten. Karsten, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know the group of retinitis pigmentosa is one of the big one. We know that in our Afrikaner population, Stargardt's disease is also quite common, and that's how we gave the carrier frequency, where we're saying how many people roughly are carriers who belong in that population. We know we do have some founder mutations for Bardet-Biedl syndrome, so it's BBS, that we do commonly see in our clinics. And then I think I've seen even quite a few LCAs, but I don't have the exact numbers. And I think there's an article somewhere, and if you'd like, I can share it with Yonela, and then she can share it with everyone who just want to read about the different conditions that they see in the country and what the current stats are. But I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I was just speaking from my personal experience and what I've seen in clinic.
I think it's also important to remember that people are often asked, why don't you know? And we say that epidemiological studies are so expensive. And if there are 1 in 3,000 in the population in RP, and it's more predominant in Caucasian or Blacks, that money could be better spent actually doing research into curing it. Because if there's one person that we can cure with a retinal degeneration, that's one person who's going to have sight. But according to Professor Ramazar, who's head of UCT, he says there's no reason to believe that the incidence is any different in our population groups as to what we found around the world. But as you say, in our Afrikaner, Caucasian Afrikaner population, we know that there's probably a higher prevalence of Stargardt carriers because of boundary effects. And we know, for example, that conditions like age-related macular degeneration that are not strictly inherited, but there is definitely an inherited link, is higher in our Caucasian populations. But we also know that diabetic retinopathy is higher in our Black population. So we have discrepancies within the population, but we're not here to count, we're here to make a difference.
Yeah. Thank you. Yonela, do you have any other questions?
There's no other questions. Yeah.
And what I wanted to add from what Claudette said earlier on about the release form for results, and once you've signed a release form to say it's fine, the genetic counselor can share my results with Retina SA and they put it on their database. An important thing to remember is Retina SA never has your results before you. And I think Yonela knows, and the other social worker from Joburg, that I've literally even had a patient who we had an appointment, then I couldn't give a result for 2 weeks. Retina SA did not get that result until I had given the result to the patient. So the people who know your result, once they're available, obviously the person who writes the results, so Hamida and Lisa would have the result because they work in the lab, and then I would have your result, but nobody else knows your result up until I've given it to you. Then only do I share it with Retina SA. So don't ever think they have your result before you do. They don't. I think that's the ethical process of doing it, because we also to respect your privacy, but we also don't want a situation where you accidentally told your result in a way that isn't beneficial for you, as we would do in genetic counseling. Yeah, thank you. I think we don't have any questions.
Any other comments from the panelists?
I just want to say, can you hear me, Yanela?
We can hear you, Carol.
Thank you for a really wonderful talk. And it's something that we in the PE office have felt is long overdue, where we needed this talk, particularly to our members. And I know that we've had you deliver some results in our office from a distance. And I've sat in on a few, and the clients thereafter have really felt that it was well worth it, and they've gone away much better informed than before your counselling session. So thank you for your empathy towards your clients. We always feel that empathy when you're talking to our clients, and thank you for that. And thank you for this wonderful talk tonight.
It's a pleasure, Gail, and I do try my utmost best. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got one more question. Sorry, this is from Kathleen Flanagan. I also want to say thank you for a really informative discussion. Can you explain the part about doing genetic testing before pregnancy and maybe using good genes in artificial insemination?
Okay, thank you, Kat, for that question. So we don't like to term it good genes and bad genes, because even if they're disease causing, then we don't think we can call them bad genes. But so there's two ways of testing prenatally, or you can test before you're pregnant, which is the pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And I think if you see it written on the internet, they'll just write PGD. And what they do, it's similar to just having IVF. So they would harvest your egg and on a petri dish, put it together with the sperm, let it grow a little bit. And the embryos that they would usually put back after you've done IVF, before they put them back, they take samples from them just to make sure that they don't have the disease-causing mutation. So they don't have, for example, if you have retinitis pigmentosa and a mutation in ABCA4 gene, and we know what mutation it is, we go test for that mutation, and all the other embryos that don't have that mutation, they implanted back into you. But obviously, if you want one child, they won't implant like 4 embryos. They'll implant like 1 or 2 just to make sure you fall pregnant. And the other ones, they freeze them and keep them for another time that you would like to fall pregnant. And an important thing with PGD is that we're not testing for everything. We don't test for every single possible condition there is. Like we do with retinal conditions, you test for something that is specific, that your child could be at risk of inheriting. Then the second option of testing is to test when you are pregnant or when your partner is pregnant. And that it involves taking a sample from the fetus. That could be the amniotic fluid, can be the cord blood, which they would do later, and another procedure. And then what they would do is go test that. And depending on how far you are within the pregnancy, you can be offered termination of pregnancy if you want to, because your child is affected with that condition. Otherwise, other parents just want to test so that they know and can prepare themselves, especially for a young or early onset condition. For the late onset conditions, we can't test parents just for them to know, because now it takes away the child's autonomy or the child's right to know. Because remember, you're going to have this child, you already know that when they're 40 or 30 or 20, they're going to develop this condition, which is not fair on them, because you went and got a result for a condition without their permission. But if it's a situation where you're saying that you would definitely not want to keep the pregnancy, then we'd have to discuss it, because these are quite tricky, and navigating that space and termination of pregnancy can be quite difficult. And that's why we deal with them on a case-to-case basis. And that's why we always recommend that even before you have children, see a genetic counselor, discuss your different options, and see what would work best for you. Because a lot of people, they actually just want to know just to know and not to necessarily stop the pregnancy and not continue. So those are the options. I'm not sure if it was clear, Kat. Please let us know if it was clear.
Malebo, may I just, that's wonderful explanation. May I just inform people that you can't test your embryos if you don't know the gene. So the patient or the person who's affected has to know their gene. So if you think you're going down that route, you must actually have a genetic test yourself before you can then do IVF and PGD.
Yeah. And thank you. And she has another test. She has another question, a follow-up, that how much would it cost? So in addition to the artificial insemination, this would also cost extra. I'm not sure how much it costs because I haven't been through this procedure yet with a client, because most of mine, I see them in state, and this is usually not an option for them because of financial reasons. But however much normal IVF costs, then you add in the cost of them extracting from the embryos, and then after extracting from the embryos, just add an additional cost of how much the test would cost in general. So if genetic testing for that particular gene was going to cost you 3,000, it would probably still be 3,000, but plus all the other processes that lead to being able to have the sample. And then you also have the normal cost of IVF. And I don't know, IVF, I'm not sure if the price had gone down, but it was looking something like 70,000 to 100,000, but I'm not sure about the prices. If anyone knows about artificial insemination prices, please do share. I haven't had personal experience with it yet. But if you'd like more information, then you can contact me and we can just look through it and I'll find some research for you. Well, find places where they do it and they can give you quotes about how much artificial insemination would cost.
So Gail and Yanela, I think we are out of time.
Yes.
So Malebo, we could keep you here all night. But, I just would like to call on Gail to wrap.
Well, thank you very much once again to Malebo for an excellent talk. To those who have participated in the talk, thank you for being with us tonight to share. And please send in your questions. Any one of us, I'm sure, will be happy to answer. And if we can't, we will direct them to the relevant person. So thank you once again. Have a good evening further, and we look forward to more talks of this nature going forward. Thank you very much.